Hey everyone, so today we're going to talk about a topic we all think we know, sexuality. But we're going to look at it through a totally different lens. We're about to dive into a massive shift in how we actually understand and discuss one of the most fundamental parts of being human.
Okay, let's just jump right in. For so long, any conversation about sex was just dominated by these words on the left, right? Risk, danger, disease. It was a framework built entirely on fear and a long list of don'ts. But something's changing, a new frame is taking shape, and this one is all about pleasure, well-being, and, so importantly, consent and communication. And this isn't just, swapping out a few words. It's a whole new way of thinking.
So, to really get why this new frame is such a big deal, we kind of have to look back at how we got here in the first place. Let's dig into the history that for so long focused only on the negatives.
Yeah, for a huge chunk of modern history, science and medicine basically treated sex like a problem to be solved. The entire focus was on what could go wrong, whether it was STDs or what they saw as failures in the bedroom. And the language they used, clinical terms like impotence and frigidity were everywhere. It framed sexuality not as a healthy part of life, but as something that could, and probably would, break. And this really narrow, problem-focused view didn't just stay in one place. During the colonial era, European powers basically exported their own super strict and moralistic ideas about sex all over the world. They ran into all these incredibly diverse cultures with fluid ideas about gender and sexuality, and what did they do? They labeled them unnatural or savage and pretty much crushed them, replacing them with a much more rigid, shame-based system.
But here's where the story takes a really interesting turn. Global health organizations started to push back. They began to challenge that old fear-based frame, and it kicked off this quiet but totally profound revolution in public health.
And this right here, this is the game changer. This is the World Health Organization's definition of sexual health. And sure, it's got the important stuff like well-being and a positive and respectful approach. But look at that last part, the possibility of having pleasurable and safe sexual experiences. For the first time on a massive global scale, the word pleasurable was officially written into the definition of health. That is huge.
And then, building on that momentum, the World Association for Sexual Health made this incredibly powerful declaration in 2019. They said, flat out, that sexual pleasure isn't just some nice little bonus. No, it is a fundamental part of our rights and our overall health. This just cements the idea that pleasure isn't frivolous. It's absolutely essential. And here's the critical thing to understand. This isn't just some, feel-good philosophy. This entire shift is grounded in hard science and data that shows a direct, undeniable link between positive sexuality and our actual physical and mental well-being.
Just look at this list. Study after study has linked sexual activity and pleasure to all of these incredible, tangible health benefits. We're talking about better heart health, a stronger immune system, less stress, even living a longer life. This completely changes the conversation. Sex is no longer just a risky behavior to be managed, it's a vital part of a healthy lifestyle.
And check out this number, because it really says it all. A major review of sexual health programs around the world found that when you frame things positively and you actually include pleasure in the conversation, a staggering 98% of those programs led to better health outcomes. Things like better condom use, better communication. It turns out, focusing on pleasure and well-being, it just works. But here's the twist. This idea, this pleasure-positive view, it isn't some radical new invention. Not at all. In a lot of ways, it's actually a return to the more open and diverse attitudes that existed all throughout human history, long before those more rigid moral codes came along and suppressed them.
This timeline just gives you a little taste of that diversity. You got ancient India, where the Kama Sutra treated sex like an art and a science. In ancient Greece, certain same-sex relationships were just a normal part of the social fabric, and so many pre-colonial indigenous cultures recognized fluid gender identities like the two-spirit role. It really wasn't until much more recently, in the 19th and 20th centuries, that one single rigid way of thinking was forced on pretty much everyone.
Okay, so that's the big picture. But what does this new perspective actually look like in the real world? How does it help us have more honest, shame-free conversations? Let's get practical and apply it to a real-world topic.
So when we make that switch, when we move from a model based on fear to one based on health and pleasure, it opens up a space to talk about practical things. The mechanics of getting ready for sex, of staying safe. These things stop being taboo subjects and just become normal parts of well-being. It lets us be proactive and informed, without all the judgment. Okay, for example, let's take a topic like anal douching. In the old frame, this is a subject that would be totally wrapped up in shame, or just ignored completely. But in this new frame, we can talk about it for what it is, a practical act of cleansing that some people choose to do to prepare for sex. It's just a health and hygiene topic, simple as that.
And to talk about doing it safely, we've got to start with some basic biology. The anal canal is lined with this really delicate layer called the mucosa, and its job is to be a protective barrier. It's not like skin, it's much more fragile. And we also have two anal sphincters, an internal one and an external one, and there would give us control. Just understanding this basic setup is step one for safe practices.
Now look, we're not talking about this to scare anyone. It's actually the opposite. It's about empowering you with knowledge. Because that mucosa layer is so delicate, doing it the wrong way, too much water, too much pressure, harsh soaps, can cause tiny little tears. And these microscopic wounds can become a pathway for infection. So understanding the risks is really about understanding how to avoid them.
And that brings us to the really important stuff, the principles for doing this safely. Goal number one is always to protect that delicate mucosa, which just means being gentle. This might mean using a specific tool like a simple squeeze bulb with body temperature water instead of, say, a high-pressure shower attachment. And remember, the goal here is just cleanliness, not sterility. That's impossible and totally unnecessary. But most importantly, and this is where that new frame really shines, is open communication. Talking with your partner about what feels good, what feels safe, what feels comfortable, that is the single most important tool you have.
So let's bring all of this together. After seeing this huge shift in how we view sexuality, what's the big takeaway here? What does this new frame actually mean for all of us in our lives?
Well, it leaves us with this one final, really important question. If we truly accept this idea, that pleasure is a fundamental part of our health and our human rights, then what needs to change? What has to change in our schools, in our doctor's offices, in our laws, and maybe most importantly, just in the way we talk to each other? What does a world that actually values sexual well-being for everyone really look like? That's something worth thinking about.